From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, welcome back. Dr. Jason here at Dental Lighthouse Podcast. Really excited to go back to the phones, so to speak. It's actually a Zoom call, but I'm dating myself. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I used to go back to the phone. We're going back to the phone. So I have Dr. P from the great state of Texas, and him and I have been talking a little bit offline before we hit the record button. He's got a couple challenges that I think we've all faced from time to time, and I'm excited to unpack them with him and hopefully come up with some solutions. So Dr. P, how are you doing?
Hey, Dr. Jason, thank you for having me on board. Doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing really good, better than I deserve. I'm excited to unpack it. So there's a couple issues here. One is, let's not call them issues. There's a couple opportunities here. One is, how do we keep a full schedule full? And then the other one that we started to talk about was, how do I deal with my attrition numbers? So both super important. Let's unpack the first one, and then we'll ultimately go on to the second. So can you give our listeners, in your own words, a little bit of a description, what you mean with how do I keep my schedule full?
Right. So we see on an average about 50 to 60 new patients every month, but yet we have a lot of holds. I run 3 columns. Our confirmations are really good. We confirm 1 month out, 1 week out, 3 days out, and even the same day. And even then, even after confirming everything, the patient will either no-show or cancel. And I don't know if it's because of the demographic being extremely blue-collared, but we get a lot of cancellations. So how some of the offices are like 2 weeks booked out, 3 weeks booked out, that's never the case with us. We literally have openings every day. So there are a lot of opportunities over there, and that's also bringing us into like the attrition rate because of that. So,
right. So when you say other offices are booked out 2-3 weeks, I think my office is a great example of that. In our hygiene department, we're booked out pretty far. It's hard to find a hygiene appointment if you're going to look out. But to the point that I think you're making, come the day of the appointment, or maybe even the day before the appointments, then you start to see patients fall out of the schedule. So you have openings. So is it safe to say that your hygiene department is fairly busy, but then when you get to either the day before or the day of, people start to no-show, call and cancel, and that's where you're ultimately seeing the openings?
Yes and no, because considering seeing 60 new patients, say, if I say 60 new patients in January, technically speaking, my June should be completely booked with at least 60 recalls, right? So we should be busy in June, but even then, when we reach towards June, historically speaking, we start seeing openings happen right and left, and they're not getting filled back in, even though I'm seeing 60 new patients in June again. So yes, because like sometime 1 or 2 months before, we see that the schedules are kind of booked and we have some openings so we can squeeze in and stuff. But then as we come closer to 1 week out, we start seeing more and more and more openings. And then most cancellations are happening the same day.
Right.
So,
all right, let me just get a little bit more information. When you say you're averaging 50 to 60 new patients per month, which is a great number, as you shared with me before we hit record, you're in a 1 doctor, 2 hygiene office. So 50 to 60 new patients a month for let's call it a bread and butter general dentistry practice is great. Now, I know you have a unique skill set. You do a lot of sleep apnea and stuff like that, but just for the sake of a majority of our listeners, if you're a one doctor, two hygiene practice and you're working, in a bread and butter PPO driven practice, 45 to 55 new patients per doctor per month is really, really good. So you're definitely hitting that metric. I'm curious, are these new patients typically coming through the hygiene department or are they coming through your side of the schedule?
Um, Both, because the new patients also include some limited exams as well.
Okay.
Then we convert them into a new patient, convert them into comp exams. Um, but we're getting them from both sides. So people are either finding us because their family members came in and then they come in
Hmm.
for like emergency treatments or something like that,
Hmm.
or they're coming through hygiene where they're like, okay, I'm scheduling online for a cleaning and then we're coming in. But even when they schedule online, they schedule in my column sometimes,
Hmm.
just because they don't have an opening on the hygiene side at the time that they want. So they just like
Hmm.
put themselves on my side.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Okay.
one.
That makes sense. Would you say that of these 50 to 60 new patients, um, a majority of them are actually scheduling and coming to the appointment? So this cancellation issue that you referenced early in the call is not so much with new patients, but it's with recall patients or patients that need operative crown and bridge surgery that are in your schedule and then ultimately falling out. Is that safe to say?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool.
100%.
Perfect. So the first thing I would consider is some type of deposit protocol. Now, whenever I mention a deposit protocol to doctors that don't currently have one, they get a little worried. Oh my gosh, how are my patients going to react? And I understand that mindset. The real root of the problem that we have here, and no judgment, I'm just going to speak honestly, is the patients are not valuing your time. So they make the appointment, they reserve an hour of the hygienist's time, they reserve 2 hours of your time, whatever it is. And there's no big deal in their mind to simply get to that day or the day before. And then they say to themselves, well, I have something, it's a beautiful day. I'd rather go for a hike, or I'm going to go on a date, or, oh, I can't get out of work because I didn't make the request. So the easiest thing to do is to simply call you and say, well, I can't come in. And um, if you're, for lack of a better term, supporting that behavior by simply saying something to the likeness of, okay, Mrs. Jones, just call us when you're ready to reschedule, or okay, Mrs. Jones, I can put you in this next available appointment, which is 2 weeks from now, then you're not correcting the behavior, you're ultimately supporting it. So what we do in our organization and with my coaching clients that have run into this issue, we believe in financial commitments or deposits to reserve time. And this is not a black and white system. You're going to have to ultimately decide how much of this you want to use and how much of this you don't want to use. But in our organization, if a patient has an appointment with you, the doctor, they're paying a deposit for that appointment. So I don't know how you schedule your particular side. I know you said you work out of 2 to 3 chairs. Again, in our world, if they're scheduling for anything that we call first chair, so first chair appointments are typically crowns, implants, extractions, and bone grafts, implants, a quadrant of fillings, whatever is going to be a majority of the doctor time, then we're requesting a deposit to hold that appointment. The deposit is fully refundable if they cancel within 48 hours. Again, you can change that if you want it to be 24 hours or something like that, but I would encourage 48 hours. So they put down a certain amount of money to reserve the appointment, and that dollar amount goes towards the appointment. What we have found when we do that protocol is if a patient truly wasn't planning on showing up for the appointment, but they just made the appointment so they could get out of the office, they won't do that anymore because you're insisting on a financial commitment to hold the appointment. How much should you insist on? Again, this is your system, so it depends. We typically do $75 per hour, or you could do a percentage of the copay that they're going to ultimately owe you, or something in the middle. But again, it's just been our experience that when there's a financial commitment at the time of scheduling the appointment, either if that person is in person, let's say it's a new patient that you diagnosed a crown on and they need to come back in 2 weeks, we're collecting the deposit there. Or if it's someone that left your office without scheduling and you're going through your unscheduled treatment list, Mrs. Jones now wants to schedule that crown, we would insist on a deposit to get that appointment scheduled. You will get some resistance, but I can assure you that your schedule will stay significantly busier compared to how it is now if you were to implement a protocol like I'm describing. How does that land up for you?
So I have some follow-up questions on that.
Yeah.
We do the cancellation policy where we'll be like, hey, you'll be charged $50. So many times the patient will keep the appointment, but we haven't tried the deposit, I'll be honest. Now, the deposit thing would work for, say, treatments, but what about patients who are scheduling like a recall, which is normally covered by the insurance, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
100%. So same protocols apply, a little bit different, and I'll explain that to you here in a second. But I just want to touch on what you just said. It's been our experience, and I've been doing this for 25 years. I have a lot of brain damage on trying to figure all of this out. When we bill someone a cancellation fee, it creates resentment, it creates animosity. They don't like it. And I learned that the hard way. So I would much rather insist that someone makes a deposit or a reservation fee or whatever you want to call it to reserve the appointment or to hold the appointment, as opposed to billing someone after the fact for a cancellation fee. Now, what I'm assuming, and I'm making an assumption here, right? I don't know you very well, and I'm just making assumptions based on my own brain damage. When you have a patient that calls you and falls out of the schedule, and you threaten them or you ultimately charge them a cancellation fee, I would guess a majority of those fees are not being paid because what's probably happening is the patient's pissed and they're finding another office because you've gone to the point of charging them this fee. It's a weird dynamic from the patient's perspective. And again, it's just been my own lived experience. The patients are so much more willing to pay a deposit to hold an appointment versus pay a cancellation fee after the fact when they missed an appointment. Does that make sense?
yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
So that's how I would handle the doctor side. As far as the hygiene side, again, completely up to you. I'll share with you what we do, and then you can decide if you want to copy our system exactly or if you want to modify it however you see fit. Um, we do take deposits for scaling and root planing appointments because they're more involved. Um, they're more the hygienist time. They're harder appointments to find, blah, blah, blah. So we will insist on a reservation fee or a deposit to schedule scaling and root planing. If it's recall, and again, this is just us. If it's recall, we do not insist on a deposit to hold the appointment. Now, if the patient calls us day of, or actually calls us within 48 hours and says, I'm going to miss my appointment, I'm sick, I'm this, I'm whatever it is, what we do is we give them one strike or one period of grace. And we say, we had this time reserved specifically for you. Is there any way that you come in? We have verbiage and I can send it to you. And if they absolutely if they can't keep the appointment, we'll reschedule them and warn them that if this happens again, they're going to need a deposit to reschedule. So we'll reschedule them without a deposit. If they do it to us again within an 18-month period of time, we insist on a deposit to schedule their next recall appointment. And again, very similar psychology of the deposit versus the cancellation fee. If they do it again, we say, Mrs. Jones, this is the second, and we have it all documented. This is the second time you've canceled on us same day in the last 6 months. Our hygienist time are so valuable. We have so many patients that are trying to get in, and we just can't tolerate this behavior. Because of that, we're going to need a $75 deposit, fully refundable, to hold your next appointment if you would like to reschedule. And we'll have patients say, oh my gosh, you're so right. I'm so sorry for doing this to you. Here's $75. Again, fully refundable. As soon as you come in, we'll credit your account. And then we'll have patients that are pissed. The patients that are pissed, we don't want them anyways because they don't value our time. So they're going to go find another office and they're going to screw them out of their time. So we have found that it's a win-win situation. Is it foolproof? No. So we still get to the day of the appointments and we'll have some recall appointments fall out of the schedule. We never have quads fall out of the schedule and we never have doctor appointments fall out of the schedule, which makes me wonder if I should start scheduling deposits for even recall appointments, but that's a conversation for another day. But if you follow this protocol, I can assure you that you'll see a significant decrease in the number of last minute cancellations that you currently have falling out of your schedule.
So what would you do if a patient is calling you, say, same day or day before, saying, hey, my kid is sick. I know I paid the deposit, but I don't want to cancel. I'm going to reschedule. What do you do then?
I mean, so it depends, right? So if they have a pattern of behavior, right? So if it's a recall appointment, are you talking about like for a recall appointment?
Both. Like patient, it's 1 hour booked for hygiene for recall versus say even like a 1 hour restorative appointment on the doctor's side. The patient has confirmed everything is fine. They've paid the deposit that they were supposed to, right? And now they're calling you a day before or day off to be like, hey, we're gonna reschedule. We're not canceling, we're rescheduling and pushing it out, right? So would you take the deposit and be like, okay, it's gonna be a new deposit now? Or would you?
I would, if it's especially if it's hygiene, because the reason that, again, with our system, the reason that they're even paying a deposit is because they have already shown us twice in the last 18 months that they routinely cancel same day or the day before. So if they've put a deposit on, because this is now the third time, and they're calling me that day and saying, I can't come in, I just want to reschedule. Sorry, Mrs. Jones, that reservation fee that you applied to your appointment was for today's appointment. I hope you can come in today. If you cannot, you're going to need a new deposit to reschedule your hygiene appointment.
And the original one will be taken as like cancel last minute kind of fee and not going as a credit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But you understand where I'm coming from, right? So again, let's just unpack the recall situation again. I've scheduled a recall appointment in your office. I'm all excited about it. The day of the appointment, I call and say, I got called into work. And then you would say, are you sure there's any way you can't come in? You know, we have this time reserved just for you. And I don't really value your time. So I'm like, no, sorry, I can't do it. Just get me rescheduled. So you rescheduled me for 2 months from now, right? 2 months from now comes, and then I say day of, the day before, I'm sick, I can't come in. Boom. That our system is, okay, you have now screwed us 2 times in 2 months. Our system is 18 months, but you have now screwed us 2 times in the last 2 months. In order to get back into our hygiene schedule, in order to get another recall appointment, to protect ourselves, to protect our hygienist time, we're going to insist on a fully refundable $75 deposit to get rescheduled. What do I mean by fully refundable? As soon as you walk into the office for that appointment, we will credit your account. But we are not going to put you back on the schedule. And I wouldn't use this language, but this is basically what you're saying. I will not give you another opportunity to screw us because you have a history of screwing us and you don't care about our time. You don't value our time.
Right. Okay. Understood.
And again, you're going to upset some people, but it's been my experience that the people that are truly sorry are the ones that will gladly pay the deposit because they know they're going to show up for that appointment and they're going to get the money back. The people that are playing the victim, oh, but you don't know my boss, or you don't know this, or I don't want those patients anyways, because they're just going to bitch and complain about me insisting that they pay a deposit to come in.
Right. Right. Understood.
So I have a whole document on that. I can send it to you after the call. Any of the listeners that want access to that, you guys know my contact information is on the website, dentallighthouse.com, and we can send you. It's a simple 2-page document. And all of our systems are intended to be so damn simple to follow that my teenage son could be at my front desk and have absolutely no question on how to run the system. That's what I want. I think it's sometimes when we get into these elaborate, webs of systems where you need a PhD to kind of figure it out. That doesn't serve anyone. So it should be a real simple, clean system like I just described to you, where you can have a fairly competent treatment coordinator, patient advocate, whatever you call your people up front, that can manage the system properly.
Okay, understood.
Let's talk about the second problem. I'll let you again describe some context with patient attrition.
So for patient attrition, just for instance, right now in 2024, we had 709 patients go inactive, and this is all dental intel. We had 709 patients go inactive, and we had 660 new patients. So we netted a negative 49 patients. And then in 2025, year to date, we have 91 new patients and a total of 145 patients going inactive. So we are already netting 60 patients, 50 patients, negative 50.
Yeah. So that's an issue, right?
Right.
That's a big issue. And you don't need to be a mathematician to understand that. So let's just talk about a couple of core principles. Reappointment rate. Are you tracking reappointment rate, and are your hygienists good about reappointing recall appointments back into their own schedule?
Yes. So when our rule is when the patient leaves from the office, they have to leave with an appointment.
Okay. I love that rule. Is it being followed?
It is, but again, the patients say like, "Oh yeah, I'm not sure right now, so I'm just gonna get on the books." But then they always, last minute cancel, change, all that.
So we already know how we're going to deal with that based on our the previous part of this phone call. I totally get it. And again, just putting myself in a patient's shoes, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 6 months, but I can buy into the idea of, if I don't make an appointment, then I'm going to get lost in the system, and it's going to be really, really difficult for me to get back in the normal rotation. So whenever a patient says to us, well, I can't schedule because I have no idea what I'll be doing in 6 months, then we're using that exact language. We're saying, look, here's the deal, Jason. If we don't get you scheduled now, you're going to get lost in the system. And come 6 months, when it's due for you to schedule, we're not going to have any time set aside for you. We're going to be booked solid. So let's at least get you on a specific day and time 6 months from now. And when we get closer to that, when we send you a confirmation 1 month out, if that time no longer works for you, then we'll find some wiggle room a couple days before, a couple days later, something along those lines. So that's the first thing I would do, is I would insist that everyone gets reappointed. So again, I value that you feel that that's an important metric. I would actually, again, if you're going to use dental intel, so be it, I would start to track that on some type of scorecard. And again, you know how I feel about scorecards. If you listen to the podcast, you don't even need to share this scorecard with your team. It can almost be an internal scorecard where you're insisting that the reappointment rate is at least 95% or greater. And there's a lot of good data to show that if the reappointment rate goes below 90%, then your hygiene department is dying. So be curious what your reappointment rate is. I would guess it's probably in the mid 80s. And that's leading a little bit to the attrition problem that you're describing. So that would be the first thing. Any questions on that?
So what we say to the patient is, because we used to tell them like, yeah, you can call us when we get closer. So we changed our verbiage on that. And now we say, if the patient is not sure, we say that, listen, we don't want you to fall through the cracks. We want you to come in. So how about, since you're not sure, at least you made it at 8:00 today. So how about I bring you the same time 6 months from now, 8:00 on a Monday, because it seems like that kind of works for you. So if anything changes, we'll see. But then we keep that appointment. And that's when the patients are okay to sign on. But for the reappointment rate, our reappointment rate is above 80 right now. So
it's about 80?
It's about 80. Yeah. So
Yeah,
we
no
need
good.
no
Yeah, no
good.
good. Yeah. But again, like we said at the beginning of the call, what an opportunity. So we've identified, where we are struggling, and now we know what we want it to be. So this is an opportunity to coach up your team. They probably making some assumptions here, but perhaps they didn't know what winning is from a reappointment rate perspective. Maybe they thought 80% was great. Well, this is just an awesome opportunity for you to clarify expectations. We're currently at 80%, and because we're at 80%, it's leading to this attrition number. So we need to recalibrate our expectations. Our new goal for reappointment rate is going to be 90%. Once they can hit 90% for 6 months, then I would change the goal to 95%. And that's where it should ultimately land.
Okay. Um, how do you? So there are some things I don't know how to track this. I guess you can help us out in this. So, like I said, the patient's going inactive. What we did was earlier this month in February, we called all the patients from January. We had 103 patients going inactive in January. So we tried calling all of them, out of which about, I think 47 patients actually answered the call.
Okay.
Right. And we came across, so what we did was we made an Excel sheet and found out the reason. 2 patients went somewhere else. 10 patients asked for their x-rays, but we don't know if they've gone somewhere. They didn't say anything on the phone. 11 patients was the United Healthcare issue that I mentioned to you before,
Yep.
that we accidentally got dropped out while renegotiating the fees.
Yep.
But my thing is, it was very tedious to actually put everyone on the Excel sheet, keep a track on things. So how do you keep a track of all these phone calls? Because out of 103, only 47 patients picked up the call, and that after multiple tries.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But I mean, this is going to sound stupid, and I don't want to state the obvious, but one of the primary ways to avoid doing what you're describing is to put yourself in a situation where you don't have to do it. Right. So if we can make sure that we're staying out in front of the attrition issue, then you really don't have to go through these hurdles to deal with it. Now, I love the fact that you realize you have an issue and you're trying your best to solve it. But to your point, it's a lot of arduous work. And I would explain that to my team. If you get any pushback from your team, what you just described is perfect. I would say the reason that whenever I'm changing something, system, goal, I always have to have clarity with the why. This is why we're doing it, right? So you just unpacked it beautifully. The reason we're changing the goal from 80% to 90% and eventually 95 is we have an attrition issue, and it's become extremely hard to get these patients back activated into the office once they become inactive. And then just describe the situation that you just described to me of I've spent hours with the spreadsheet trying to get patients back in. It's so hard. It would have been so much easier just to get them back in the schedule when they were here for their last appointment. So that's a really good way to get buy-in from a team as to why you're changing a system. The other thing that a lot of dentists don't think about is, and we can do some math here to kind of have you maybe come to this epiphany if you haven't thought about it, is how many patients can one hygienist manage in a year? Do you have any clarity on that?
No.
Okay. So let's assume the worst. Let's assume that you don't do any perio. So there's no scaling and root planing. Let's assume that you don't even see new patients in hygiene. Let's assume that you're just scheduling 60-minute recall appointments for all of your hygienists, right? So that's 8 appointments per day. I'm assuming you're working 4 days a week.
4 days.
That is 4 days. Okay. So they're managing 8 a day times 4 is 32, right? So 32 patients in a week times 4 is 128 patients in a month times 6. I'm going to break out my phone here. 128 times 6 is 800 patients in a 6-month period, right? Now, in theory, if you're seeing them every 6 months, then that's all that a hygienist can manage is 768 patients, period. Once they are managing 768 patients, they're full. There's no room for additional people. Does that make sense?
Right.
So you have two hygienists. So again, no perio, no new patients, no quads. At the maximum, two hygienists can manage 1,500 patients if they're seeing just recalls all day long, right? Now you're telling me that you're averaging, let's go on the low end, let's say 50 new patients a month, right? So 50 times 12 is 600. So that tells me, again, just stick with me with the math. If you're averaging 600 patients a year and your two hygienists can only manage at capacity 1,500, that tells me after a little over 2 years, the hygiene department is already at capacity. And you've been open almost 5, you said, right?
Yeah, almost
Right.
5.
So where do those patients go? Like there's no room for them. Now, again, I know that not every new patient is going to ultimately need a hygiene appointment, but at the same time, you're also putting quads in there. You're also putting new patients in there. So what the point I'm trying to make for you is one of the reasons that dentists suffer from attrition is because they don't have any room to put these patients in. So am I suggesting that you go out and find a full-time hygienist and hire them right away? I am not. But what I am suggesting is if you deal with some of the issues that we talked about towards the beginning of the call, if you can get the schedules to be a little bit more predictable, you are going to have to hire another hygienist to manage the new patient flow that you're blessed to deal with on a monthly basis. Because if you don't, there's simply no room to put these people. So another way to look at it is, a lot of times when people have so many patients that are inactive, I would coach them up to do a reactivation project. And we can't unpack exactly what that is here, but at its core, we are blasting these inactive patients email and phone, incentivizing them to come into the office and get back on track, so to speak. And sometimes we will incentivize them via like free whitening. Other times we will incentivize them via like, have you read the newest research on the oral systemic connection? We have something that's going to land well with an inactive patient. So if these patients were to call you, like let's say you got 100 calls today for patients that were inactive, you might have places to put them tomorrow because of your cancellation issue, but you have no place to put them beyond that. Like you had referenced, you know what I mean? So there's a capacity issue here. So I know it sounds counterintuitive that I have all these holes in my schedule and you're telling me to hire another provider.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Right, exactly. So I'm not saying hire them yet, but I'm saying if you can, over the next, say, 3 months, button up some of these cancellation deposit things that we talked about, and then also button up the reactivation thing that we talked about, the next domino to fall is another provider, because another hygienist, because you're not going to have any place to put these patients moving forward.
I see. Okay. I understand.
I know it's a lot to unpack, but again, luckily, we can always hop on another call to deal with that part of it. So, what I'll tell you in closing this call is first, do the priority. The first priority is a deposit protocol to keep your schedule full. The next priority is a reactivation. I'm sorry, not a reappointment system that everyone's on the same page with. And then, test drive that for 3 or 4 or 5 months. And then you're going to be forced, because your schedules are so full and so tight, you're going to be forced to bring on another provider. Otherwise, you're going to plateau in terms of your growth.
I see.
All right, brother.
Okay.
Really good call. I think this information is going to be super helpful for a lot of listeners. And if they're anything like I was when I was a little bit earlier in my career, this was a huge issue, and we came up with some solutions, and I hope these solutions land well for you. So I appreciate you giving us a call, and let's check in soon. Let me know how the progress is. All right.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a good one.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.